London, 1823. Autumn had cast a golden glow across the city, but for Miss Eleanor Hawthorne, the season brought only another round of dinners she had no desire to attend. 7 long seasons of society's watchful eyes, of whispers behind fans, of proposals politely declined, each one more absurd than the last, had left her accustomed to being invisible. Not a single gentleman had ever asked her to dance for reasons beyond duty or obligation, and she had learned, quietly, to measure her happiness in stolen moments among the library stacks or the hidden gardens of her family's estate. But tonight was different. Lady Montague's dinner promised an unparalleled assembly of London's most influential, and Eleanor's aunt, Mrs. Hawthorne, insisted that Eleanor accompany her. "You must be seen," she repeated, adjusting the lace at Eleanor's wrist. "It is time. Society recognized your worth before you fade into another season of obscurity." Eleanor, for once, offered no argument. She had grown weary of resistance. Tonight, she would simply endure. The Montague estate gleamed with candlelight, every window a reflection of opulence, every servant poised like a sentinel, ready to cater to the whims of the elite. Eleanor's entrance, however, was modest. She wore a gown of muted sapphire silk, embroidered delicately, with silver thread that caught the light with each subtle movement. Her chestnut hair was loosely braided, framing her face so that her hazel eyes, sharp and perceptive, surveyed the room without yielding to the crush of social pressure. It was then she saw him, standing near the grand piano. A figure that seemed sculpted from shadows and command was the Duke of Ashbourne. His presence was immediate, magnetic, undeniable, a dark flame in a room of polite candles. Black hair brushed back from a strong forehead, gray eyes that held secrets she could not yet guess. He spoke to a group of gentlemen, his voice calm, measured, yet carrying a weight of authority that drew Eleanor's gaze despite herself. She had heard of him, of course, the Duke whose discretion was legendary, whose wealth was matched only by his sharp intellect, and whose reputation for cold detachment made him the subject of whispered speculation. Many called him unapproachable, aloof, and dangerous in a society built on charm and spectacle. Eleanor, who had long learned to notice what others overlooked, felt the stirrings of curiosity, a quiet intrigue that neither time nor experience had dulled. Her aunt, ever the social strategist, maneuvered Eleanor through the room, introducing her to distant cousins and friends of friends. Yet Eleanor's attention was fixed on the Duke. And then, inexplicably, he turned, his gaze meeting hers. The briefest moment, yet it felt as though the air itself had shifted. Eleanor's heart beat faster, though she was certain he had no inkling of her existence. Beyond passing observation, dinner proceeded. A dance of formalities and carefully measured words. Eleanor spoke little, her voice calm and poised when necessary, her mind cataloging every detail. The nuances of conversation, the glances exchanged, the subtle alliances of influence in the drawing room. Yet throughout, she felt that same intangible pull, the weight of the Duke's eyes tracing her movements, with a focus that seemed impossible in a room filled with spectators. After dinner, as the assembled company moved to the music room, the Duke of Ashbourne approached. No fanfare, no pretense, simply a measured stride that brought him before Eleanor. "Miss Hawthorne," he said, voice low yet carrying the resonance of command. "You seem out of place among these many eyes." "I have long learned to navigate what is necessary," Eleanor replied, her tone cool but not unkind, "though I cannot claim to enjoy it." He inclined his head slightly, a gesture almost imperceptible, yet Eleanor felt the weight of it, a recognition that transcended titles or expectation. "Few observe without being observed," he said softly, a hint of amusement in his voice. "And fewer still notice what truly matters." Eleanor arched an eyebrow, curiosity sharpening her senses. "And what matters, Duke, in this world of superficialities?" His gray eyes met hers, unwavering. "The rare unspoken truths, the hidden strengths, the hearts that refuse to be tamed by convention." A chill ran through her, though it was not unpleasant. She had spent years being invisible, unnoticed, and yet here was a man whose gaze cut through that invisibility, recognizing the substance that society had long dismissed. Eleanor realized, with an inward start, that her life had changed in the space of a single glance, and that the story she had always resigned herself to a life of quiet observation, of watching others take the stage, might be about to shift in ways she could not yet imagine. And as the Duke extended a gloved hand toward her, Eleanor, for the first time in 7 long seasons, allowed herself to wonder whether the invisible could, at last, be seen. The London season was at its height, the air thick with perfume, candle smoke, and whispered gossip that moved faster than any carriage on the cobbled streets. Eleanor had barely slept since the dinner at Lady Montague's, her mind replaying the Duke's words, the weight of his gaze, the strange unspoken recognition that had sent a flutter through her carefully guarded heart. She had spent 7 seasons invisible, yet suddenly, it seemed, she was being observed, not merely for appearances, but with curiosity, with interest, with a measure of respect that startled and thrilled her in equal measure. It was on a crisp November evening that Eleanor received her next summons, a masquerade ball at the estate of Lady Weatherby, renowned for its extravagance, secrecy, and the subtle games of status it encouraged. Her aunt, seeing opportunity, insisted she attend. "This is no ordinary assembly," Mrs. Hawthorne warned, arranging Eleanor's mask of delicate lace across her eyes. "It is a gathering of influence, of alliances hidden beneath finery. Be seen, but measured, speak little, observe much." Eleanor, though apprehensive, allowed herself to be guided, her mind quietly bracing for the performance she had come to accept as her social duty. The ball was a swirl of color and music, masks hiding half the faces, and yet somehow revealing more than any unmasked gathering could. Eleanor's sapphire gown gleamed under the chandeliers, and as she moved through the room, she felt the familiar pang of self-consciousness, tempered by the growing awareness that she was no longer merely a wallflower. Eyes lingered, not unkindly, not judgmentally, but with a careful assessment that made her pulse quicken. And then, as though summoned by fate itself, the Duke of Ashbourne appeared once more. His mask, dark and simple, accentuated the steely line of his jaw, his gray eyes flashing beneath the brim with recognition. He moved through the crowd, with the effortless command of a man who owned the room, yet refused to be defined by it, until he reached Eleanor. "Miss Hawthorne," he said, his voice cutting through the music, low enough that it could have been a private whisper, though they stood amid swirling dancers. "You navigate this chaos with surprising grace. It suits you." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I do what is necessary," she replied, though her words carried a note of defiance she had not intended. She was tired of being merely observed. Tonight, she wanted him to see her as she was. He inclined his head, expression unreadable behind the mask. "And yet, you are unlike the rest. I have watched, and I have noticed, that your mind moves differently, sees differently. You are rarely found where others expect you to be." Before Eleanor could respond, a figure, a young coquettish lady recently returned from Bath, interrupted, attempting to draw the Duke's attention with a flirtatious laugh. But the Duke's eyes, even momentarily distracted, returned to Eleanor, a subtle but unmistakable tether of interest. The young lady, oblivious to the silent tension, fluttered away, leaving Eleanor both relieved and unsettled. The evening progressed, a dance of masks and secrets, until the Duke extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" Eleanor hesitated. She had danced before, countless times, but never with a man who stirred in her such an unfamiliar blend of curiosity, desire, and admiration. She placed her hand in his, and immediately, the room seemed to fade. The orchestra, a distant hum, the glittering masks of other guests, mere shadows at the edges of her vision. They moved together across the polished floor, Eleanor aware of the heat of his hand against hers, the subtle command of his posture, the quiet assurance that he would lead, yet never dominate. Conversation was unnecessary. The unspoken language between them said more than words could convey. Yet society is rarely patient with silence or subtlety. Whispers circulated almost immediately. "The Duke's interest in Miss Hawthorne is unusual. She is hardly the kind of woman who would attract him. Has he finally found amusement in an overlooked spinster?" Eleanor, normally impervious to such chatter, felt a strange thrill, both dangerous and exhilarating. She realized, with a mixture of dread and anticipation, that she had stepped into a game whose stakes she had never imagined. As the night drew toward its climax, the Duke guided her to a quiet balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens. The air was cold, scented with frost and winter blooms. "You intrigue me," he admitted, voice low, "not because you are charming, or fashionable, or obedient, but because you exist outside their expectations. You are entirely your own." Eleanor felt her heart tremble. 7 seasons of invisibility had honed her ability to endure, to deflect, to observe without engaging. And yet, here was a man who refused to let her remain unseen. "And what am I to you?" she asked softly, a question she had not dared to voice aloud before. He leaned close, his breath brushing her ear. "For now, a mystery. But one I intend to solve, not with the shallow curiosity of society, but with something rarer: attention, patience, and perhaps admiration beyond mere decorum." The wind stirred the lace of her mask, and Eleanor felt a shiver of anticipation. She knew, as she gazed at the distant lights of London, that her life had changed irrevocably in the space of one evening. She had stepped onto a stage she did not choose, into a story that would be written not by convention, but by the silent accord of 2 minds recognizing each other. And, in the quiet thrill of that moment, Eleanor understood the truth. Sometimes, the most profound connections began not with fanfare or spectacle, but with a single measured gaze, a whisper of recognition that promised everything, yet revealed nothing. The weeks following the masquerade ball passed in a haze of social obligations, letters scented with lavender, and the subtle scrutiny of London society. Eleanor moved through the drawing rooms and parlors with a newfound poise, yet beneath her graceful exterior, her mind churned with anticipation, questions, and the faint, thrilling fear that her heart dared not speak aloud. Every glance, every passing conversation seemed colored by the memory of the Duke's words on that balcony. "You are entirely your own." Lady Weatherby's masquerade had ignited more than just whispered intrigue. Rumors now followed Eleanor like shadows, subtle, relentless, impossible to ignore. She was the mysterious spinster who caught the Duke's attention, a phrase repeated in polite society, with a mixture of incredulity and fascination. While some dismissed her as merely a novelty, others, more discerning, more dangerous, watched her carefully, curious to see if she could endure the silent trials of power, wealth, and expectation. It was on a rainy Thursday evening, under the heavy velvet curtains of the Grand Ashbourne Hall, that the true test came. Eleanor had been invited to the Duke's private salon, ostensibly to discuss the charitable initiatives she had begun supporting, a cause close to her heart. But she quickly discerned that the evening held subtler intentions. The room was dimly lit by the warm glow of 100 candles, their flames reflecting in the gilded mirrors, doubling the sense of intimacy and secrecy. The Duke himself appeared from the shadows, his presence commanding yet restrained, as though the walls themselves deferred to him. He gestured for Eleanor to sit, offering no words, only the quiet weight of expectation. "You've grown into the season remarkably well," he said at last, voice low, carrying a hint of both amusement and admiration. "I confess, I expected you to falter under the scrutiny of society. Yet you are resilient." Eleanor allowed herself a modest smile, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of defiance and intrigue. "Resilience," she said softly, "is sometimes all one has when the world watches too closely." Before the Duke could respond, a sudden knock echoed through the room, followed by the entrance of Lord Harrington, a man whose smile held a dangerous combination of charm and ambition. He bowed with the practiced ease of one accustomed to both flattery and manipulation. "Your Grace," he said, inclining toward Eleanor with a calculated glance, "I trust I am not intruding." The Duke's gray eyes narrowed imperceptibly, but he motioned Harrington to remain. Eleanor sensed immediately the tension in the air, an undercurrent of rivalry that was far more subtle and more dangerous than the obvious judgments of polite society. Harrington's interest in Eleanor had been whispered in drawing rooms for weeks, and it was clear now that he intended to stake his claim, however covertly, in the battle for attention, influence, and though unspoken, the Duke's admiration. "I've come to discuss your charity work," Harrington began smoothly, though the sharpness in his eyes betrayed another agenda. "Your initiatives are commendable, truly, but might I suggest a different approach? A broader appeal, more ostentation perhaps?" Eleanor's lips pressed together. She recognized the patronizing undertone, the subtle implication that her efforts were incomplete without the validation of a man like Harrington. She met his gaze steadily, her voice calm, measured. "My goal is not ostentation, Lord Harrington, but impact. These young women require opportunity, not admiration." Harrington's smile faltered, and Eleanor felt the faint thrill of triumph. Before he could recover, the Duke's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a quiet assertion of presence, of protection, and of ownership, though not in a possessive sense, but in the understanding that Eleanor had never known before. "Impact is admirable," the Duke said, his tone smooth, yet edged with authority that left Harrington momentarily disarmed. "But so too is the discernment to distinguish between what is necessary and what is trivial. Miss Hawthorne has both in abundance." The room held a tense silence, the storm outside echoing the unspoken confrontation within. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She realized in that instant that her path with the Duke was not one of passive observation. It was a delicate, intricate dance, where every smile, every word, every glance carried consequence. After Harrington departed, nursing the sting of quiet defeat, Eleanor and the Duke remained in the salon, the distant rumble of thunder framing their conversation. "You handle yourself with remarkable composure," he remarked, studying her closely. "Yet tell me honestly, do you not feel the weight of their eyes upon you?" Eleanor allowed a sigh, her hands tightening slightly on the velvet armrest. "I do. But for the first time, I feel the strength to endure it, and perhaps even to shape it." He stepped closer, the flickering candlelight casting shadows across his face, highlighting the intensity in his eyes. "You are extraordinary, Eleanor, not because of beauty, not because of wealth or position, but because you remain yourself in a world that seeks to mold and diminish you." Her heart, long accustomed to restraint, faltered for a moment, then steadied. "And you, what of you, Your Grace? Do you find me extraordinary?" The Duke's lips curved in a rare soft smile, one that held the promise of secrets yet to be shared. "I find you dangerously compelling, and it terrifies and delights me in equal measure." The remainder of the evening passed in a haze of conversation, strategy, and subtle flirtation, each moment a test of wit, poise, and self-possession. By the time Eleanor returned to her rooms, the storm had passed, leaving the streets of London glistening with rain. Lanterns reflected like scattered stars upon the wet cobblestones. Eleanor stood by her window, mask still clutched in her hand, and allowed herself a small, daring smile. She understood now that her life had irrevocably changed, not because of titles or appearances, but because of a quiet, unyielding force that had chosen her, recognized her, and sought her in the quietest, most profound way. And in the back of her mind, a single question lingered, one that had no easy answer. Could she trust a heart so powerful, so commanding, and yet so utterly devoted to her, to remain hers in a world built on whispers, ambition, and expectation? The morning after the storm, London seemed to exhale a reluctant calm. Eleanor awoke to a gray sky, the scent of rain still lingering on the cobblestones outside her window. Yet, despite the peaceful exterior, her mind was anything but still. The encounter with Lord Harrington the previous evening had left an echo she could neither ignore nor fully understand. It was not merely his arrogance. It was the silent acknowledgement that there were eyes and ambitions within society that could challenge her position, or worse, the Duke's devotion. She dressed with deliberate care that morning, selecting a gown of deep sapphire silk that mirrored the depth of her thoughts. The folds of the fabric brushed her ankles, a reminder of both elegance and restraint, the duality she now embodied more naturally than ever. The doors of Ashbourne Hall opened to her like the prologue of a long and uncertain symphony. Each step she took resonated through the gilded corridors, as though heralding her presence, and perhaps, her ascent. Sebastian met her in the main hall, his expression unreadable beneath the calm exterior he so masterfully maintained in public. "Good morning," he said, voice smooth, but carrying the subtle tension that Eleanor had learned to recognize. "Morning," she replied cautiously, sensing the weight behind his words. "I received a letter last night," he continued, producing a folded piece of parchment sealed with crimson wax. "From Vienna." Eleanor took it from him, noting the familiar script that bespoke both diplomacy and discretion. The words within were brief but potent, a warning veiled as courtesy, suggesting that a faction of European nobility was questioning the Duke's alliances, and by extension, the judgment of his companions, including Eleanor herself. Her pulse quickened. The stakes of her social ascent were suddenly magnified beyond mere curiosity and whispered gossip. Now, her intellect, her composure, her very presence would be measured against not just London society, but the exacting standards of international politics. Sebastian, sensing her unease, took her hand gently. "This is not a threat to you," he assured, his eyes steady, holding hers. "But it is a reminder that our lives are intertwined with forces far larger than ourselves. And you, Eleanor, you are more than capable of navigating them." Her confidence swelled at his words. But a shadow of doubt lingered. Could she truly meet the expectations of a world that had long dismissed her as inconsequential? She recalled the quiet despair of years spent fading into the background, the silent observation of others' triumphs. That woman had ceased to exist. Eleanor now moved with a deliberate grace, her intelligence and empathy as sharp as any weapon or strategy employed in the drawing rooms of Europe. The day passed in a blur of correspondence, engagements, and discreet meetings with Sebastian's closest advisors. Yet, the true trial arrived with the evening soiree at Alvarin House, a mansion renowned for its opulence and the ambitious guests it attracted. Eleanor entered beneath a canopy of crystal chandeliers, her gown catching the candlelight, turning her into a vision both formidable and approachable. Lord Harrington was there again, his gaze lingering far longer than polite custom allowed. Eleanor felt the old thrill of rivalry, now tempered by experience and an unspoken agreement with herself. She would not be intimidated. The Duke, ever watchful, guided her through the crowd, introducing her as his companion, his confidant, his equal. "Miss Hawthorne," he intoned to a curious French diplomat, "possesses insights on both charitable work and international affairs that are unparalleled." Eleanor met the diplomat's eyes, demonstrating a poise that radiated both humility and command. Words flowed effortlessly, bridging languages, ideas, and perspectives, leaving observers in quiet admiration. Even Harrington, though concealed behind a practiced smile, seemed momentarily unsettled by her composure. Later, in a secluded gallery lined with oil portraits of ancestors and past dukes, the Duke drew her aside. "There is a matter you must know," he said, his tone dropping to that hushed, intimate cadence that always sent a shiver down her spine. "A secret has surfaced, one that concerns not just our place in society, but the very foundation of Ravenswood itself." Eleanor's breath caught. "A secret," he nodded, eyes darkened by the weight of responsibility. "An old debt, a claim, and a rival. One who believes the Duke can be manipulated, or worse, undermined. This person has sent emissaries to London, testing our loyalties, our judgments, even our discretion, and they will not hesitate to exploit anything, including you." For the first time since their acquaintance, Eleanor felt the cold brush of fear, yet it was swiftly tempered by determination. "Then I must know who they are. I must be prepared. I will not be a pawn, Sebastian. Not now, not ever." The Duke's hand lifted, brushing her cheek with gentle reassurance. "And that is why I trust you. You are no longer the observer, Eleanor. You are the strategist, the partner, the one whose mind rivals even the most seasoned courtiers. Together, we will navigate this storm." As the evening waned, Eleanor and the Duke returned to Ashbourne Hall, the city lights glimmering like 1,000 watchful eyes. Eleanor realized that the challenges ahead would not only test her courage, intellect, and grace, but also the depth of the bond she shared with the Duke. She had endured gossip, skepticism, and the quiet judgments of society. But now, secrets, threats, and power struggles demanded her full strength. And somewhere in the quiet recesses of her heart, a whisper persisted. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer merely the Duke's companion. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had been seen, chosen, and could no longer be ignored. The morning after the Alvarin soirée dawned crisp and bright, but Eleanor felt the weight of the previous night's revelations pressing on her chest. Over breakfast at Ashbourne Hall, she and Sebastian spoke little, yet the unspoken understanding between them was profound. The secret adversary lurking in London was no longer abstract. It was tangible, dangerous, and patient. Eleanor spent the day reviewing every correspondence, invitation, and acquaintance, that might intersect with the Duke's political and social engagements. Maps of alliances, lists of attendees at key salons, and notes on influential courtiers spread across her writing table. Like a strategist planning a campaign, her mind moved with precision, dissecting patterns, anticipating moves, and considering contingencies. She realized the danger was not only to the Duke's reputation, but to their very lives. Subtle manipulation could destroy what they had painstakingly built. Sebastian watched her with a mixture of awe and admiration. "You move like a general before battle," he remarked, handing her a cup of tea. "I should be the one advising you." "You are," Eleanor replied, her gaze fixed on a particular name, highlighted on a list. "But this requires a different strategy, subtlety, discretion, and a touch of deception." Their moment of calm was interrupted by a hurried knock. A messenger entered, pale and flustered. "Your Grace, urgent news. Lord Harrington has hosted a private gathering this evening, and several whispers suggest sensitive information will be leaked regarding your household, Duchess." Eleanor's pulse quickened. The opportunity to act was immediate, and hesitation could be fatal. She and Sebastian exchanged a glance, heavy with unspoken plans. By dusk, Ashbourne Hall was alive with preparation. Eleanor chose a gown of emerald green velvet, understated yet commanding, reflecting both her intellect and poise. Sebastian admired her, noting how naturally she now navigated the role of Duchess. The woman who had once feared whispers and gossip now confronted them as a calculated adversary. The Harrington gathering was held in a lavish townhouse, each room adorned with gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers, the sort of extravagance designed to impress and intimidate. Eleanor and Sebastian entered quietly, blending with the crowd while observing the dynamics at play. Harrington greeted them with a smile that barely concealed his disdain. "Duchess Eleanor," he said, bowing slightly, "your reputation precedes you. London has certainly noticed your intellect, and your ambition precedes you, Lord Harrington." Eleanor replied smoothly, her tone polite yet sharp, like steel cloaked in velvet. The evening unfolded with whispered conversations and carefully placed insinuations. Eleanor observed every gesture, every glance, noting which alliances were forming and which were fraying. Harrington attempted subtle provocations, innuendo about the Duke's judgment, questions about Eleanor's family background, but she countered each with a blend of charm and unyielding intellect that left him momentarily disarmed. The pivotal moment arrived in the drawing room, where Harrington intended to reveal a rumor about the Duke's political dealings, hoping to embarrass him publicly. Eleanor intercepted him, her presence commanding attention. "My lords, my ladies," she began, her voice steady, confident, and resonant. "It appears there is a story circulating about the Duke's decisions. But perhaps it is not the facts we should consider, but the perspective. Decisions are rarely made in isolation. They are the product of counsel, trust, and careful deliberation. And those who truly observe, who understand the nuances of diplomacy, know this to be the case." A hush fell over the room. She paused, letting her words settle. It is easy to manipulate perception with whispers and shadows. But truth, however obscured, always emerges. Her gaze met Harrington's sharp and unwavering. And those who spread misinformation often reveal more about their own insecurities than the subject of their gossip. A few subtle nods from influential attendees indicated the tide was turning. Harrington's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of frustration. Eleanor had not merely defended the Duke. She had asserted herself as an equal, a strategist, and a woman of undeniable presence. Sebastian, standing beside her, squeezed her hand, his eyes betraying pride and admiration. "You have turned the tables, Eleanor," he murmured. The remainder of the evening proceeded under her subtle control. Conversations shifted, alliances realigned, and Harrington found himself isolated. His whispers now met with polite skepticism rather than fascination. Eleanor's grace, intelligence, and quiet strength had not only protected the Duke, but elevated her standing to one that none could dispute. Returning to Ashbourne Hall in the quiet of the night, Eleanor felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had stepped fully into her role, not as a passive observer, but as a decisive force. The Duke, ever perceptive, studied her as she entered the library. "You're remarkable," he said simply. "You have not only safeguarded our reputation, but also demonstrated to London exactly who the Duchess of Ravenswood truly is. Eleanor allowed herself a small, victorious smile. It seems whispers and shadows are no match for strategy, and perhaps courage. Sebastian drew her close, holding her as the city slept beyond their windows. Together, he said softly, we are formidable, and the world will learn to respect both of us, not in spite of, but because of what we bring to each other. Eleanor rested her head against his chest, the weight of the evening lifting. She realized that the trials she had once feared were merely the proving grounds for a woman who had discovered her own strength, intellect, and heart. And as the candles flickered, casting soft shadows across the library, she knew that whatever intrigues awaited, she would meet them not as a frightened spinster, but as a duchess, wise, resolute, and entirely unafraid. The days that followed the Harrington gathering were a mixture of calm and calculated vigilance. Eleanor had learned long ago that moments of peace were rarely permanent in London's high society, and the Duke's enemies were patient, sophisticated, and relentless. Every social invitation, every seemingly casual encounter, now carried a potential threat, and Eleanor's mind constantly ran through contingencies and responses. One morning, a letter arrived at Ashbourne Hall with no return address. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she slit the envelope, revealing a single sheet of delicate parchment. The message was short, almost cryptic. Some truths are safer left buried. Think carefully, Duchess, before curiosity becomes folly. Sebastian, reading over her shoulder, frowned deeply. A warning or a taunt? Eleanor folded the letter carefully, her resolve hardening. Both, she replied. And it means someone fears my curiosity, which means they have something to hide. From that moment, Eleanor became a shadow in society. She attended every gathering with keen attention, noting whispers, observing gestures, and following subtle patterns in conversation. It was at a private soirée, hosted by Lady Wexford, that she first discovered the clue she had been unconsciously searching for. A passing remark about an estate in the countryside, its owner disappearing shortly after a diplomatic scandal, sparked a memory in Eleanor. She began to piece together a web of connections, betrayals, and quiet manipulations, stretching back years. Sebastian noticed her obsession and approached cautiously. Eleanor, do you wish to pursue this? He asked, concern in his voice. She looked up, eyes blazing. If I don't, someone else will. And if that happens, the Duke, our lives, everything we've built, could be compromised. Their investigation led them to the quiet town of Ravensleigh, far from the glittering balls of London. There, in a discreet manner on the outskirts, Eleanor discovered a hidden ledger containing correspondence, financial records, and meticulous notes documenting a conspiracy against the Ravenswood name. Lord Harrington, it seemed, was merely a pawn in a larger game orchestrated by a coalition of jealous nobles seeking to manipulate political outcomes and undermine the Duke's influence. That evening, back at Ashbourne Hall, Eleanor presented the findings to Sebastian. They've underestimated us, she said, her voice steady. They think because I was once overlooked, I would remain so. But their arrogance has blinded them to the one advantage we have, knowledge. Sebastian studied her, awe-struck. And your courage, he added softly, lifting her hand to his lips. You navigate shadows, as if you were born for them. The threat soon escalated. At the next London Assembly, Eleanor and Sebastian found themselves subtly cornered by Lord Harrington and two accomplices. They attempted to intimidate, to sow discord publicly, hinting at scandals and questioning the Duke's judgment. But Eleanor, calm and deliberate, countered every insinuation with precise facts and measured charm. Each of her words, each glance, each subtle gesture turned the tide. Within the hour, Harrington and his allies found themselves isolated, their whispers drowned by Eleanor's careful exposition of truth, diplomacy, and wit. Later, alone in the garden with the Duke, Eleanor allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. I never imagined I would find purpose in the shadows, she admitted. You were always meant for light, Eleanor, Sebastian said gently. But light, when it understands shadow, is unstoppable. You have not only protected our household, you've redefined what it means to be a duchess. Yet, Even as they celebrated this victory, Eleanor knew the game was far from over. Letters continued to arrive, each more cryptic than the last. A hidden adversary remained, patient and cunning, suggesting that the ultimate revelation was yet to come. A secret that, if exposed, could challenge not only the Duke's position, but the foundation of their trust and partnership. That night, as the candles flickered in Ashbourne Hall's grand library, Eleanor sat with pen in hand, sketching out every connection, every possible outcome, every move her adversaries might make. She realized that intelligence, courage, and intuition would not merely defend her position, they would define it. Sebastian entered quietly, taking her hand. "Whatever comes, we face it together," he said, his voice resolute. "And we will prevail," Eleanor replied, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Not through fear, but through strategy, grace, and truth. Let them whisper, Sebastian. Let them scheme. They will find the Duchess of Ravenswood is a force no shadow can obscure." The night deepened, the air heavy with anticipation. Eleanor's mind raced with plans, contingencies, and the thrill of the challenge ahead. She had stepped fully into her role, not merely as wife or duchess, but as a woman capable of matching intrigue with intellect, courage with calculation. And she knew, deep within, that the coming days would test everything she had learned, but she would meet them head on, unafraid and unyielding. The first frost of winter had arrived in London, painting the streets with a silvery sheen and casting the city in a crisp, almost ethereal light. Eleanor could feel it in her bones. The shadow that had been hovering over Ashbourne Hall and the Duke's affairs was about to make its move. A lavish ball, hosted by the Duchess of Wexford, offered the perfect stage for hidden enemies to reveal themselves. Eleanor arrived in a gown of deep emerald silk, the color a subtle defiance to those who sought to undermine her. Her hair, swept into intricate coils, framed a face alight with resolve. Sebastian's hand tightened around hers, a silent anchor against the currents of society, scheming swirling around them. Whispers had begun even before their arrival. Eleanor noted the subtle glances, the thinly veiled smiles, the carefully rehearsed politeness. But she had anticipated every nuance, every veiled threat. Her observations of past gatherings, her study of habits, her own courage, these were her weapons. The evening's tension came to a head when Lord Harrington, emboldened by the subtle backing of other jealous nobles, attempted a public accusation, citing questionable dealings regarding the Duke's recent diplomatic initiatives. The assembled elite gasped, some leaning forward in anticipation of scandal. Eleanor's heart remained steady. This was her moment. With graceful composure, she approached, her voice calm but firm. "Lord Harrington," she said, her tone both courteous and commanding, "your claims are serious. I invite you to present evidence. Let us discuss facts, not insinuations." Harrington faltered, unprepared for the Duchess's directness. I have documents. Then we shall review them together," Eleanor interrupted, motioning to Sebastian, who stood tall, his gray eyes like steel. "And I trust your grace," she added, acknowledging the Duke, "will oversee the proceedings, as befits your office and the dignity of Ashbourne Hall." The scrutiny turned swiftly. Eleanor produced the ledger she had found in Ravensleigh, carefully annotated and cross-referenced, exposing Harrington's manipulation of records and his complicity with the shadowy coalition of nobles. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to shocked silence. Every observer, from the austere ministers to the gossipy matrons, realized the depth of deception Eleanor had uncovered. Harrington's face went pale. This cannot be." "Indeed, Lord Harrington," Eleanor said, her gaze unflinching. "It is only the truth, and truth, I have found, is more enduring than your ambition or malice." Sebastian stepped forward, his voice low but resonant. "The Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood will not tolerate schemes against their family or their honor. Let this evening serve as a clear message. Deceit has no sanctuary here." The room erupted in polite applause, some tentative, some fervent. Allies and adversaries alike saw that the Duchess, once underestimated, overlooked, was now a formidable force in London's social and political landscape. Eleanor's intelligence, grace, and courage had not only protected the Duke's reputation, but elevated her own to heights none could ignore. As the ball drew to a close, Eleanor slipped from the hall, with Sebastian to the quiet privacy of Ashbourne Hall. The frost glimmered on the gardens outside as they walked, their breaths forming little clouds in the cold air. "You were extraordinary tonight," Sebastian said, lifting her hand to his lips. "You wielded wit, intellect, and poise like a sword, and you cut through deceit without even raising your voice." Eleanor leaned against him, her mind still racing with the evening's events. "And yet," she said, "this is only the beginning. There are still shadows that linger, still whispers in corners I have not yet uncovered. But now I know I can face them. With you, with our family, with our purpose." Sebastian held her close, his hand brushing her hair back. "You are not merely a duchess," he murmured. "You are the heart and mind of Ravenswood. The city, the society, even history itself, will remember the woman who matched the Duke in every way." Later, in the quiet of their private library, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the timid spinster, overlooked and underestimated, to the Duchess commanding respect and wielding influence, from observer to creator, strategist and partner. And still, her story was unfolding. She opened a letter that had arrived that morning, one she had set aside during the chaos of the ball. The seal was unfamiliar. Breaking it, she found a note that made her pulse quicken. "Well done, Duchess, but the game is far from over. Watch closely. Your greatest challenge is yet to come." Eleanor smiled faintly, a spark of excitement in her eyes. Challenges had always brought out the best in her, and with Sebastian by her side, she knew that no scheme, no whisper, no shadow could diminish her light. As the fire crackled in the library hearth, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood sat together, planning, strategizing, and readying themselves for whatever new twist fate would deliver. For Eleanor had learned something essential. Power was not given. It was claimed, nurtured, and defended with courage, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. And she, the once overlooked spinster, now understood fully the extraordinary influence of a woman who had found her voice and her heart. Winter's first snow had settled over Ashbourne Hall, softening the edges of the estate with a pristine white blanket. The gardens, frosted and still, mirrored the serenity that now enveloped the Duke and Duchess after months of intrigue, society battles, and personal triumphs. Yet Eleanor's mind was restless, not with worry, but with the possibilities that lay ahead. She had faced challenges that tested her intellect, courage, and heart, and she had emerged stronger. The Christmas season brought the family together. Sebastian had insisted on a quiet celebration, a small gathering of those closest to them. In contrast to the grandeur of London society, the warmth of the library fire, the scent of pine from the hall's festive arrangements, and the soft laughter of children echoed through the stone corridors. Eleanor watched Sebastian interact with their youngest wards, his stern yet gentle presence commanding the children's respect and affection. She felt a swell of pride and love, knowing that the man she had waited 7 long seasons for was hers entirely, and that she had become indispensable in his world and in her own. But fate had one final surprise in store. Eleanor had begun to feel subtle signs of life stirring within her, teeny movements that hinted at the continuation of their legacy. The news brought joy beyond description. That evening, Sebastian held her hand in the quiet of the rose garden, the moonlight glinting off the frost. "Our family," he whispered, his voice husky with emotion. "You've given me everything, Eleanor. And now, a future we can grow together." Eleanor smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "A future," she said softly, "that we will shape with every choice, every lesson, every act of love and courage." The days passed, each filled with preparation for the coming arrival. Eleanor's role as Duchess had matured into a harmony of influence, philanthropy, and leadership. Yet she never lost the personal warmth and intelligence that had captivated Sebastian from the beginning. She continued to guide the school she had expanded, teaching young minds the values of inquiry, logic, and confidence. The stormy intrigue of London society became a distant memory as Eleanor and Sebastian retreated into the quiet strength of their family and the rhythms of estate life. Letters arrived from friends across Europe, praising Eleanor's intellect and diplomacy during the Vienna Congress. Her name was no longer whispered with doubt or envy. It was spoken with admiration, the mark of a woman who had navigated treacherous waters with unwavering grace. The long-awaited day came when Eleanor's child was born, a son, robust and healthy, with Sebastian's gray eyes and Eleanor's determined expression. Holding the infant in her arms, Eleanor felt an overwhelming sense of completion. The boy represented not just their love, but the future they would forge together, a legacy of intellect, courage, and devotion. Sebastian gazed at the child with wonder, tracing the tiny fingers with reverence. "He has your chin," he murmured, "and perhaps your resolve." Eleanor laughed softly. "And your patience, God help us," she said, her smile radiant with happiness. As the months turned into seasons, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood continued to solidify their influence, not through ambition or intrigue, but through respect, intelligence, and compassion. Eleanor's insights continued to guide Sebastian in both diplomatic matters and estate management, their partnership a rare fusion of intellect and love. Society, once skeptical, now watched with awe as the couple moved together seamlessly, two forces perfectly aligned, commanding admiration rather than envy. One evening, as the sun set behind the frost-laden hills, Eleanor found herself in the library, Sebastian at her side. Their son, now toddling across the rugs, was exploring the shelves of ancient books and ledgers, his curiosity a mirror of his mother's. Eleanor reflected on her journey, the shy spinster who had faded into the background, the woman who had spent 7 seasons observing the happiness of others, and the Duchess who had carved her place in history with courage, intelligence, and heart. Sebastian pressed a kiss to her temple, whispering, "You were extraordinary from the moment I saw you, Eleanor. I merely had the fortune to recognize it." She smiled, the warmth of love and fulfillment glowing within her. "And together," she replied, "we have created a life, a family, and a legacy that will endure far beyond the whispers of society." Their son toddled over, reaching for Eleanor's hand, and she bent down to scoop him into her arms. Sebastian looked on, pride and wonder shining in his eyes. The past, with its shadows and intrigues, felt distant now, a prelude to the extraordinary life they had claimed together. Eleanor held the boy close, Sebastian at her side, and in that moment, she realized that true power, true love, and true fulfillment were inseparable. The world might still whisper, might still judge, but in the embrace of her family, she had found what she had always sought: recognition, respect, and the profound satisfaction of being fully seen, fully loved, and fully herself. As the fire crackled and the snow fell silently outside, Eleanor whispered, almost to herself, "Some things are worth waiting for 7 seasons for, and the greatest love stories begin with a quiet whisper, not a shout." Sebastian smiled, echoing the words that had begun their journey. "Final mena and contri," he said softly. "And I found you," she replied, completing the circle of love, courage, and destiny. The snow continued to fall. The world hushed in its serene embrace, and the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood, with their heir nestled safely between them, began the next chapter of their extraordinary life, together, unshakable and eternal.